Welcome, everybody, to the latest episode of Shoot, Punch, Kick, the first and only movie podcast on the internet. We are a nostalgic journey through 80s and 90s action, horror, and sci fi films. This is the place where we overthink and overanalyze the best and worst from the golden age of genre cinema. And I am Telly, joined by my co hosts, Dash and Carlos. What's up, guys?
What up? What's
What's
going
going
on, my
on,
goons? What's up,
everybody?
brethren?
All right. And today's episode, we're going to be exploring one of my personal favorite B movies from the period, Maniac Cop 2. And there's a reason we picked two and not one. But this is a movie I've loved for a very long time. But I'm curious, Dash, your experience with the film?
I had to rewatch it for the podcast. I think I mentioned it really briefly, but my intro to Maniac Cop was HBO used to do these like Thursday night B
Mhm.
movie things. Like this is when cable was like 8 channels. And I remember catching it was most likely just the first Maniac Cop, but I wound up renting them after, and I loved them back then. So I'm glad that we got to rewatch these.
All right. And Carlos?
Yeah, so Maniac Cop is kind of seminal in the space, right? It's whenever you talk about B movies, especially around this time period, it's one of those, the franchise as a whole is that. So this is a movie that I saw, as a matter of, but I couldn't tell you exactly when I saw it or where. I'm guessing I probably saw it with you, Telly, a bunch of times. And it was always something in the ether, right? It was always a franchise that I was aware of. And again, I'm sure if I put it in my head, I'm sure that I had seen it, but it wasn't something that stuck with me. So again, while I was always tertiarily aware of it, I only vaguely remember it, and it's kind of one of those things where I have vague flashes of some of the set pieces, but I couldn't tell you which movie it was from. So seeing this for this podcast ostensibly is the same as me kind of watching it for the first time, even though I was already familiar with it and kind of what it was all about.
All right, cool. Yeah, I saw the first Maniac Cop on VHS, and the first movie I found genuinely scary, and
Mhm.
then the second one is a total. It just amps up everything by 200%. So the first one is sort of
Mhm.
alien to Maniac Cop 2's Aliens, in terms of ramping up the
Okay.
action and just the violence and everything
Okay.
else. So
It's bigger and bolder.
yeah, so Maniac Cop 2 is the second installment of the Maniac Cop trilogy. It was released direct to video in the US on December 13th, 1990, 2 years after the first Maniac Cop. And it stars Robert Davi, Claudia Christian, Leo Rossi, and Robert Zadar as the Maniac Cop. It's directed by William Lustig and written by Larry Cohen. And speaking of writing, we thought we'd try something different this week in terms of the plot synopsis. So we turned to ChatGPT to see what they would come up with to recap the film. And I'm going to read
Our future AI
exactly.
overlords.
It's going to do everything. I mean, maybe we should just get ChatGPT to do this podcast. But I asked it to give me a plot synopsis of Maniac Cop 2, and I'm going to read verbatim what ChatGPT generated. So here we go.
Can you do it in a robot voice? No, I'm
Yeah,
just
we
kidding.
should
Sorry.
try that next time. But no, that'll get old after a couple seconds. So I'll just read it in a semi-normal voice. So Maniac Cop 2 picks up the chilling tale of Officer Matt Cordell, the undead cop with a thirst for vengeance. As the city of New York remains gripped by fear following Cordell's murderous rampage, a dedicated group of police officers led by Detective Sean McKinney and Officer Susan Riley are determined to stop him. Despite being presumed dead, Cordell resurfaces, more relentless and bloodthirsty than ever. He continues his killing spree, targeting both criminals and innocent civilians alike. With each brutal murder, the pressure mounts on McKinney and Riley to apprehend him before more lives are lost. As the body count rises, McKinney and Riley delve deeper into Cordell's past, uncovering disturbing secrets and a web of corruption within the police force. Along the way, they face resistance from their own colleagues who are reluctant to believe that one of their own could be capable of such atrocities. Meanwhile, Cordell forms an unholy alliance with a deranged serial killer, creating an even greater threat to the city. Together, they unleash chaos and terror, leaving a trail of destruction in their wake. In the race against time, McKinney and Riley must confront Cordell and his accomplice in a heart stopping showdown. With the fate of the city hanging in the balance, they must summon all of their courage and resourcefulness to defeat the Maniac Cop once and for all. But as they soon discover, Cordell is not so easily stopped, and the battle between good and evil rages on with deadly consequences. So there you go, Maniac Cop 2 in a
Maniac.
nutshell. Can you imagine
Dude.
that ChatGPT can give you a synopsis of a obscure B movie from 34 years ago?
I wonder where it pulls, like where it pulls. I'm wondering, like, maybe it's pulling from Wiki, but like an IMD description, like without having watched the movie. I'm wondering where it's pulling that information from.
Just the internet as a
The
whole.
internet,
But
media, yeah.
I would say though, maybe I did watch the movie. That's what would be dope, right? Like it's in the database and it's like, give me an hour and 27 minutes. I'll be right back.
So the Maniac Cop 2. So let's talk about it. Let's dive into it. So as I mentioned, this was the sequel to Maniac Cop, the first Maniac Cop from 1988, and the reason why it was made was Maniac Cop, the original one, was apparently a big hit on home video. So they were able to raise a bunch of money and actually raise a budget of $4 million, which is about four times more than the original film, which is about
Is
1.2
that how much?
million.
So the first one, I thought I saw was Trauma, wasn't
No,
it?
not
I thought I saw the Trauma
no, not
logo.
trauma.
Are
Definitely,
you sure?
a
Because
hundred percent not
the first
trauma.
one.
Trauma would definitely be
All right,
very different. But
No,
obviously,
I
I thought
reserve.
I saw that at
I
the
thought
opening credits as
I thought I
well.
saw that, bro. I beg to. Well,
it's not
listen.
a
Let's
trauma
let's table
movie. They might
this.
have distributed or something, but it's not a trauma movie. The
Oh,
first one,
okay.
They got a logo placement
yeah,
at
I
the
saw a
beginning, I'm
logo
pretty
there,
sure.
and it felt very trauma-ish because the first one was super low budget, right? Like
yeah.
it was, you could tell it was super shoestring. So that's why I kind of bought into it. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you. Go ahead.
No, it's fine. That's actually my next point was that William Lustig, the director, known for exploitation movies, sleaze, and some B movie classics like the original Maniac. He wanted to make a bigger and better film, and he considers this movie the best film that he's ever made himself. And I think what's really fascinating about the movie, just from a filmmaking standpoint, is I know something I've brought up in previous episodes is that I can't stand it when a filmmaker makes a movie that's supposed to take place in New York and it looks nothing like New York. But what's amazing about this
Mm.
movie, watching it over again, is that they only filmed a couple of scenes in New York and they faked LA for New York in the movie. And I think they pulled it off pretty well. I mean, now that I'm older, I could definitely see where it was obviously was LA, but I thought they did a good job kind of blending everything together. Um, and then,
They did a couple of shots, right? Like I saw for sure there was a Times Square, right? When Robert
right,
Davi, introduction to Robert Davi, he comes out of an alley again. Where are all these alleys?
the
But when he
imaginary
comes out,
alley.
he's definitely
He's like, I'm
Yeah,
just on
well, that's
47th
the
Street.
amazing thing, and I mean that's a great thing about the brilliant thing about the film, like because I think William Lustig, he's a New Yorker himself, so he kind of knows like what New York should feel like and look like. So that fake alleyway, that was L.A., but when Robert Davi walks out of the alleyway, which is part of his introduction, he walks into Times Square, and obviously it's Times Square. So there was a
Times
lot
Square. And
of that
another
done
thing
in
that
the
I
film.
noticed when he walks into that alley into Times Square, something that immediately help put in perspective the time that this movie came out was there's a huge poster for Back to the Future 2
Mm.
Right.
right in the background, and so all of a sudden I'm immediately transported to going to the movies to see Back to the Future 2, and so that gave me an instant kind of point of reference to know like what New York was like at the time that this movie was made, because I have a distinct memory of my New York at that time.
I love watching
Well,
old
not my New
movies, and
York, but I saw that they had a.
I'm saying I
Oh,
love
sorry. Go
watching
ahead,
old
Telly.
movies, and you're looking at the marquees of the movie theaters to see what's playing,
Me
and
too,
it's like a
always.
timestamp of that period.
Yeah,
Mhm.
the one that caught me was when he in that scene where they had cats.
Right.
And like,
Oh yeah,
Right.
growing up, there was always the cats commercial, but
well, the Winter
now
Garden
yeah.
Theater.
Yeah,
That
so
was
I
the
mean
longest running.
it
Yeah.
could have spanned a couple of decades, but it was just good like, oh yeah, cats.
Yeah, it's definitely a product of its time. It's also a time capsule because I think around that period that's when Times Square really started to start transforming into the Disneyland that
Yeah,
we're
Giuliani,
now
right?
in. Yeah,
Yeah, yeah.
so that's a little
But
bit.
one of the things that I did like with the different parts of New York
Mhm.
was it was a little bit like a touristy, like what you think of New York. They did hit all of those. So you got like your Broadway,
You got the Bowling
some of
Green
the early
stuff.
stuff with Bruce Campbell,
Mhm.
and you know, not going into the plot, but I did not expect to see Maniac Cop
The
walking the
Brooklyn
Brooklyn
Bridge,
Bridge,
yeah.
which
Yeah,
was
yeah.
so
Well, I
awesome.
think that's what this
Yeah,
film
and
really
also,
does well. It does capture New York. It feels like New York,
mm,
and it knows New York, which is you
Mhm.
can't say the same for something
and
like Jason Takes Manhattan, where they filmed just maybe like one or two scenes in Times
two
Square, and
scenes.
then everything else is like, okay, this is definitely not New York City.
Was a sound stage or something, right? Yeah.
Not
Well,
not to bring up
Vancouver.
the first one, but there was a shot that they used, and I wasn't old enough to be walking around New York before the World Trade Center came down. So there was a perspective of down the block you could see the
Mm,
Twin Towers,
mm,
and I remember I was watching it with Elisa, and I was like, "Oh, that's Bleecker." Because I know that like view, but I never saw that view
with
before.
that.
Like I've only seen it with the Freedom Tower,
Yeah,
and it
yeah.
was just really dope to see this like block that I've walked on so many times. And Telly, to your point, like just this like it's a New Yorker made movie, and
Hmm.
it
Yeah.
comes across of like I've been on that block, I've
Hmm.
seen these, even like the Times Square in this one, it's not on Broadway and 43rd, it's like
Off
up
the
47th a little
Hmm.
bit down, like you know where like Sparrows is on 49th kind of situation.
so you
And
could see
yeah,
it,
that goes a
but
long way.
you're
Yeah,
not there.
yeah.
And I think they did another really good thing is so again that really only becomes an issue for exteriors, right? So the scenes they shot a few things clearly in Manhattan. There were a few exterior shots that they had to film clearly not in Manhattan. I'm thinking specifically the whole build up to the car chase. And I think what they did, except for the car chase itself, which led to some area that looked like hilly, which didn't look like New York at all, but the intro to that, like her apartment before they get into the cab, even though that was clearly not New York, it was shot such that it looked like it could be Queens.
Yeah.
Some
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
areas of right, like not the main portion of New York, but they got a close enough likelihood. And again, maybe she can't afford to live in Manhattan. Maybe on the cop salary, she has to live in Queens, and
Yeah.
so it was believable. They did a good job of. There was only a few times throughout the entirety of the movie where I was ever cognizant of the fact that this is clearly not New York, which is a testament
Yeah, a
to
testament
how
to
well they
William
did that.
Lustig. L.A. for New York, one of the few films that can really pull that off successfully. So let's talk about the cast and the performances because I think this cast is amazing in terms of just all the cameos and that guys in this film, as well as like people like Bruce Campbell. So first of all, the returning cast members: Bruce Campbell, Lorene Landon, and Robert Zadar. When I first saw when the first Maniac Cop came out, starring Bruce Campbell, he wasn't the sort of the cult figure that he is now. So he plays it very straight.
I forgot he was even in
Yeah, he
this.
plays it very straight,
Mhm.
and even in the second one, he plays it straight. There's no like winking at the camera, but that's one thing I love about this film is that it plays it very dead serious while still having a sense of
Mm.
humor occasionally. And then
I think
there's
also, just as as a side note, at least with Bruce Campbell, I was kind of doing through some research for like the trivia and stuff, and apparently this is a movie that he it really like loves, but also is a really tough time in his life. Again, he was going through a tough divorce, so now there's this meta that's happening now where it's like if you see Bruce Campbell in public at a signing or whatever, and you mention Maniac Cop 2 to him, he's gonna give you a hard time. And it's like a thing now, right? Where people will go up to him, mention it, and then see how he fucks with them.
oh
So I think that's kind of cool.
yeah, well, Bruce Campbell, the William Lustig, the director, was friends with Sam Raimi, and actually Sam Raimi is in the first Maniac Cop, and he has a deleted scene in Maniac Cop 2. But I think that's how they probably brought Bruce Campbell on board. And then in terms of the new cast members that are in Maniac Cop 2 is obviously Robert Davi, amazing, great character actor, B movie actor, and Claudia Christian, who I guess cult movie fans will recognize from The Hidden, and maybe sci-fi fans will recognize from Babylon 5.
Mhm.
And she has an interesting story about the film. And then there are a shitload of just cameos and familiar faces throughout the film. So Dash and Carlos, what are some faces that kind of jumped out at you where you're like, oh my God, this guy's in it?
First off was
Damn
Michael
true.
Lerner as the commissioner.
Yeah.
Um because like even him, he's like He's in a lot of stuff. Not so much a household name with me, but I'm like, oh, I've always seen him, and he's always the like dick, in like every movie. And you're just like, oh, you're gonna give the whoever I'm rooting for a really hard time, and every moment that's played up, if it's not from like burying the lead on the killings to not listening to the heroes from the first movie to being like a weasel towards the end where he wants to like get out the car and just let the maniac cop just continue doing what he's doing, and just having that character type I think is always a hit for me. So he was definitely the standout. And also Clarence Williams III,
Rest in peace.
especially a couple of times he says the word shit, which I love. Tales from the Hood. So there's that running joke of you'll get the shit. So every time he said it, I was like yes. But yeah, just that, even that like little jail scene where it became, now it's a who's who kind of moment. But yeah, just people kept popping up. Even from the Goonies. Like people are showing up. So yeah, definitely a who's who. But I think for me, like the main one who I enjoyed was who just rooted it together was Michael Lerner as the commissioner, who I hate.
And Carlos.
um,
And what one
yeah.
interesting fact about
So,
Michael Lerner, he does this movie in 1990, and then next year he's in Barton Fink and gets a Academy Award nomination for Best
oh
Supporting Actor,
wow,
which he didn't win, but that's just pretty cool.
Well, they said he did all of his parts for this in a
Yeah.
week. So I wonder if like, by the time he got to, like his next role and doing stuff, this was probably just like a blip,
Well,
on
I
the
was
radar of his
re-listening to the
year.
director's commentary, and apparently William Lustig knew Michael Lerner because they both were like Laserdisc enthusiasts, and they used to go to the same store together, and that's how they originally met and how he offered him the role.
Wow.
So
Thank you. Laserdisc,
yeah.
you've done it again.
And Carlos, any sort of standouts for you from the cast?
I mean, again, I really enjoyed the returning cast. I'm a huge Bruce Campbell fan. Robert Davi kind of goes without saying. Um, and also like seeing Danny Trejo, Clarence Williams making an appearance is really good. But for me, I think the standout is Leo Rossi. Now, Leo Rossi is another one of those actors that you see everywhere, right? And you may not know his name, but you're like, oh, he's the guy who was in that one movie, who was in that one scene. And for me, he chews up every scene that he's in this movie. Again, he plays the sidekick serial killer, friend to the maniac cop. And he just delivers every line with such joy. Like it's kind of like, it almost reminds me a little bit of Ian McDermott's the evil emperor in Star Wars, where it's just like he just exudes this happiness to be evil. And I've seen some of the reviews on either side of this discussion say that he's over the top and he's overacting, but the other end of that spectrum is he's just really fully vested. And I just love every scene that he's
Leo
in.
Rossi is just an amazing actor. William Lustig and Leo Rossi did a film right before this called Relentless, and Leo Rossi is a NYPD cop that gets transferred over to LA, and he's in a suit and tie. He's the hero of the movie. He's totally straight laced. And then they make this movie where he's just an insane lunatic, which is and you see the transformation is seamless. For me, what's
Yep.
really cool about the movie, in terms of one of the cast members, is Darth Vader's dad is in the film.
Yeah.
So Robert Earl Jones, James Earl Jones' father, plays the blind newspaper stand owner, which was a fun little,
Oh, that's who it was. Okay.
yeah.
And they gave him a whole backstory and everything too. I lost my eyes at war. I'm
Well,
moving
that
other
was awesome because
bodies.
it rooted it there was a point to it, right? He was like, this was the coldest I've ever been, rooted in this like traumatizing experience that leads to why I can't see. And all that is nothing
Yeah.
Yeah.
compared to like touching the maniac cop. I thought he was like dope. I thought he was a cool
And
character.
there's a payoff
I
to
think
that too,
also
and we'll go into the writing later. But they set that up that he felt like a dead man, and then they bring that up later when they interview the stripper, that the maniac cop
when I
jokes.
was going through
Yeah,
some of the through some of the reviews here. I found a hot take that I couldn't disagree with more. Matt Brunson on Rotten Tomatoes wrote, weakened by the performances of Robert Davi, who has about as much personality as a wet cardboard box, and Leo Rossi, who never met a scene he couldn't overact to an unbearable degree.
Right.
Wrong.
Well, I think
Wrong.
Robert
I
Davi
think
does what he needs to do in the film, and I actually liked him a lot because when you, especially killing off the main characters from the first one, and someone like a Bruce Campbell, for example, that could be just sort of you could just flush your movie down the toilet. But I think Robert Davi
yeah. They pulled the
is able to
cycle.
carry it. Yeah,
Right, your leads like
right.
very early in the movie get killed with very little
Yeah,
fanfare.
because if you don't
Yeah,
like
and
the new
you know,
characters, then your movie's screwed. But I think,
But I respect the choice,
yeah,
right? Like that's a real ballsy move, right?
but I don't want to like go too in on that review because when it starts off, Robert Davi
He
isn't
just shoots
exactly
he
the
just shoots
most
that guy in the
charismatic
alley.
when he comes out. And they're like, "Why'd you kill that guy?" Too much paperwork.
yeah.
Like it's very just like action heavy. But I think one of the things that I'm kind of enjoying with some of these movies are like one, the runtime is super short. Like we're talking about under an hour and a half. And if you don't like if you start getting too outside of like the character archetypes, then you have to start explaining those things. So like when they introduce Davi, his first scene tells you everything
You
you
need to
need
know.
to know
Yeah,
for the last 30 years of his life, about his partner, about his view on crime, how he handles situations,
And
how he
that's
yeah.
I think
works
that's
with
the
everyone,
perfect
just
and that's
from
the perfect segue into I want to talk about the script and the writing because I think that's one of the hallmarks of Larry Cohen, the writer behind this film, and he's done a lot of he wrote Hell Up in Harlem, he directed that Black Caesar, so
yeah.
his filmography goes way back from black exploitation to sort of 70s and 80s exploitation. He did The Stuff is one of my personal favorite. It's Alive, Q, the Winged Serpent. And then later in his career, he became exclusively a writer. So he wrote Phone Booth, he wrote Cellular, he wrote a lot of, these big Hollywood movies.
Other movies about
Right, and
phones.
he did Original Gangsters, right? That reunion movie for the black with all the black exploitation actors. So he's just like known to be just a very talented B movie writer, and also just a great writer in general. And I think that's what he does really smart in this film. That every character he gives them just a little bit of backstory, so they're not just simply cannon fodder. So, for example, with the stripper, right? And she dances on stage, and then they cut to a scene of her in her little shitty motel
Oh, the
room,
mom.
but they get across the fact that she's from a small town, she's lying to her parents about working a normal job, she's trying to become successful in show business, and then Maniac Cop busts in. But I feel like that's a Larry Cohen trademark, is that he's able to imbue even the minor characters with a little bit of personality. But Carlos, I'd love to
Mm.
think to just get your thoughts and just what you thought about the writing, the script overall.
So I think that this is kind of maybe a point where I'll be differing from my two brethren on the panel. I didn't love the writing for this movie. I feel so the character stuff. I agree with 100%. I love how they didn't just give. It would have been real easy for them to throw kind of one-off characters with no real background. My issues, and even some of the dialogue is kitsy, but in the best way possible. Right? It's very like noir. I love again when we meet Robert Davi, you see just the perp for some reason just jumps out of a window and lands on top of a car, and then he doesn't say freeze, he doesn't say stop, it's the police, he just shoots, right? And again, that's a great insight into like the character, and it tells me everything that I need to know about him. um and I love all of that. My issue is with the plot. It's with the conceits of who Maniac Cop is. I think it goes to some of the logical kind of leaps that we discussed last week in Big Trouble in Little China. um things like, I feel like towards the end they tried to turn Maniac Cop into an anti-hero, where he becomes sympathetic, where you're like, oh well, he was a man that done wrong, and and so you should sympathize for him, which I didn't get because he's randomly killing people for the last. I could see it if he had been killing people along a certain code. I'm only killing those people who did me wrong. I'm only killing people who are crooked cops. But he's just indiscriminately killing people. right? Other plot leaps, like Robert Davi finally finds out that it is this cop who is, in fact, it's not somebody pretending to be this cop, right? And he leaves the screen, and then all of a sudden, after the cop shootout, the cop police station shootout, he's automatically back. He knows everything that happened about how this guy was treated wrong. He knows who was involved, and he knows what to do to get the maniac cop to, like, what maniac cop is after, right? Also, again, other logical leaps, like, you know, he just talks once to the commissioner, and within 2 seconds convinces him that he's gonna throw himself under the bus, and also judges all across the board. I know what you did. Well, I'm not gonna tell him myself, but you really should, or he's not gonna stop. You know what? You're right. I'm gonna, and you know, also just and I don't know how much of this he's tied to from the previous movie, but even in the kind of previous movie, you never really get this explained to us why he has these powers. We know that he got almost beaten to death in the jail, which I think is really interesting that they took the entire sequence from the first movie shot for shot and put it in the second movie. That's interesting, and I want to talk about. But and I guess the doctor in the morgue realizes he's alive and like sneaks him out. But there's no like deal with the devil. There's no voodoo. There's no explanation as to how he's. I mean, I get the idea is what if you took Friday the 13th and instead of putting it in Crystal Lake, it's in New York, and instead of wearing a hockey mask, he's a cop, right? But so from our understanding, he's a guy who was just halfway on the line of death. Maybe it's just pure motivation that's keeping him alive through the gunshots. They mentioned he's wearing a bulletproof vest, but you never see him like even flinch. He's on fire, moving around. Like, where does he get the
Yeah,
powers
I'll
from?
give you
There was just a
I'll give
whole
you
lack
that,
of.
Carlos. Yeah, the plot, there's lots of plot holes in general. And to your point about like where how did this happen? Is it voodoo or anything? You need to watch part 3 for that answer, because it turns out
Ah,
that it is
okay.
voodoo. But I think they were making up as it goes along. But Dash, I'd love
Yeah.
to
Again,
get your thoughts on just the overall
just
writing.
very quickly before you hand over, I just want to say that what occurred to me was, again, I love the set pieces, and as far as the writing is concerned, it almost felt to me like they had their set pieces picked out, and then when the writing came, it was just let me figure out how to get Maniac Cop from point A to B. It was more about the pieces than like the plot and how to get there, and so that's how it occurred to me. But again, with that, I'll hand it back off to Dash.
No, overall, I do have a differing opinion. I think that I'm really glad that I went back and watched the first one, and it's not Lost, right? Like, the show Lost. I would have been perfectly up to speed having just watched
If you had it.
part two. But I mean, like little choices that were made really got me in early. So being rewarded for having just watched part one starts with the cold
The
open
cold intro was
right
dope.
from the beginning. And I did laugh when they just literally replayed the backstory, but again, like that would have made it fine to have not seen the
See,
first one. And
absolutely.
we're in the world of Dune and Dune 2, and it's like you can't just go and watch Dune 2. Like back in the day, every time, like I saw Terminator 2 before I saw Terminator 1, and I was up to speed, and that's just kind of, I guess, how they were done. A couple of things that I really liked about how the writing was some of the choices of how things were brought in there. So, like for example, forgot or did not expect the first cast to be completely gone, introduced to a new dynamic. I thought one of my issues with the first movie was kind of fixed with this one, where given the who the antagonist is like a cop, they play into a lot of the themes. Like this one seemed like there was a conscious choice to lean into certain questions. So for example, victims in the movie are constantly calling out for the police, expecting the police. And this is done in the first one. And
Hmm.
there's a couple of scenes where like, someone like runs over to the cop and,
Thank
the cop
you.
kills
Hmm.
him. Or they have the woman who's she's like her car won't start, and then a cop shows up and she shoots him, and it's
But
like,
that's in the first one.
yeah. So I'm saying
That was in
like
the first one.
that was
Okay.
my favorite part of the first
Yeah,
one.
yeah,
And
yeah.
then the second one kind of went more into that. So like a lot of the things in this movie seemed somewhat logical given the world that they're setting up. So, for example, the commissioner's burying the story, so it's not as much of a city that's like filled with police fear, but you do have certain aspects of like how not Teresa, yeah, Teresa wants to go on the talk show,
show.
but she can talk about it and like make it bigger. Then it becomes about political decisions to not do this. There's a whole bunch of little themes between Robert Davi's view on getting inside someone's head. He specifically says like, I don't like how people that try to get in my head. Then meanwhile, as a detective, he's getting into
her head.
that. So I'm like, within this short amount of time, there was a lot of themes, especially with how they're presenting, policing and just like the way the city works. I think one issue that I would have had with it is if you treat New York the way you treat Crystal Lake. Like it's just like, okay, here's, a killer that's kind of isolated from everything and no one's kind of like responding to these this murderer who has pretty much powers on the force, but it's kind of justified because a lot of people don't believe
Hmm.
that. They're being told not to believe it. So that stuff I liked. I'll disagree a little bit on how the set pieces kind of worked, just because like the grand finale goes back to the lore of him going back to get the people that actually killed him. Like in the first one, it was very resolved, but didn't seem to be like, these cops put him in jail, so he's getting revenge, but like the people that killed him, he never interacted with.
Hmm.
Are they alive? I don't know. So I thought that there was like a kind of escalation between like, okay, these are the guys who put me here, I'm going to go after them. Here are the guys who stabbed me, I'm going to go after them. And I thought they did some creative stuff of like getting some of his motivations. I'll be honest, I didn't really catch on to what he was doing until he met up with Leo Rossi,
Hmm.
Yeah.
where it became this whole like, oh, you're mocking the police to show them they're a mockery. And that's why he was only going after the victims and letting like the criminals go away. I'm going to be honest, up until that point of the movie, I wasn't too sure
Yeah.
what Maniac Cop
That's
was
always the
doing.
end
But
game
Um,
has
even
always
that,
been
but
it's always been yeah, kind of vague, and the director admits that, and that's why he said with Maniac Cop 2 he just wanted to keep it fast paced so you're not thinking too much about the plot holes. One thing you brought up, Dash, which really stuck out to me this time because I haven't watched the movie from beginning to end in like a couple of years, is there is a theme. There are themes in the script, and one being mental health. Because he's Claudia Christian's character is interviewing Bruce Campbell and Lorene Landon and Robert Davi because they were both all involved in a shooting, and that the issue of mental health gets brought up, and then obviously you have a psychopath who's mentally unstable, and then at the
who has the dopest house, by the
yes,
way, right? Like,
but and because that was, yeah, that felt like hell, like a layer again, a villain's layer.
yeah,
But
yeah.
at the end, even
I,
is bringing going full circle after like they bury Cordell and Robert Davi says there's only like a thin line between a good cop and a maniac cop. So I thought like
Mhm.
given what this script is, and I think the great thing about Larry Cohen that's he knows when he's writing like an A project, he knows when he's writing a B project, and he knows that Maniac Cop is a B movie that's going to be like a 90-minute film, fast paced. We're not going to get too deep into anything, but he still kind of imbues it with his own personality and his own sort of style, which I appreciated.
but even some of the things that like you brought up again, bring up, they buried him with honors, like in a full cop ceremony, right? And then like him meeting up with that with the serial killer, right? Like they never really explain what his goal was. Was he following the girl? Was he following the killer? Did he intend to like to meet up with the killer, or was he randomly there? Just like you see the killer Leo Rossi going stalking a woman, going to her home. He's about to murder her, and then just then he busts in, and you're not really sure if like, no, you're not killing her, I'm gonna kill her. But then the cops show up and they abscond together, but they never really explain like what the
No,
Maniac Cop was
No,
doing
I
there.
thought that was kind of broken down a little bit by what Rossi was saying, because he's like, he was supposed to be like the avatar, it felt like, for a lot of the motivations of the Maniac Cop. Now, whether, like, we buy fully into it, I think is, debatable or whatever. But the explanation that I
Why
got
he was
from
doing
it
it?
was that because there's this case that's going on, when they go to the news station, the commissioner's there to talk about the prostitute murders and not this
Cop thing.
maniac cop. And the he's trying to like derail the police narrative of, like, one, how they're solving crime and how they're addressing it in the public. So I think he started following
The actual killer.
Rossi. So, because he said, you're trying to make a mockery of them, and I
Yeah.
think that was why he kept going after the innocent people and not the because, even at the beginning, he gives the
Yeah, Death by
robber his
Cop.
gun back,
Death by
and
Cop, which I thought
he
was
doesn't.
cool.
Yeah, and he doesn't kill the woman either. Like, he kills the cops. He has time to kill the police, which he does. And then and then he goes back, Leo takes him back to the lair. He's like, oh, you're trying to make a mockery of this system of cops to, like, prove that they're not as noble. So I think it's more like, I thought that was a little bit of a far way to go about it, but I did appreciate, at least, like, okay, here's some, because I didn't think, based on the actions, I was like, why is, I thought they were a little bit more very clear in the first one. It was like,
Mhm.
here's a group of people, I'm going to kill them for, such reason, and then, I'm going to frame this guy so I can, they, like, had all of those things. This one was, because he didn't have the tie to the characters the way he did in the first one, I was a bit confused. But
I
I
think you
think
bring up.
that scene kind of
Yeah.
broke down
Well,
what his
well, let's
motivations
let's.
were.
I think you
I
bring
think.
up a good point too.
Sorry, Carlos, you can finish your thought.
I was just gonna say, I think you brought up a good point too about the him being. I hadn't really considered him being aware of the media coverage of his actions, because one of the things that occurred to me that you brought up a minute ago that now kind of makes more sense in this context is the idea that I felt sad that they got rid of the in the first one. It was like everybody was afraid of the cops, right? And at a certain point now, good cops are getting killed because people, that girl in the car saw pulled over or whatever, and she saw a cop coming and she killed him. And I thought that's a really interesting dynamic. What happens when you go from being looking at the cops as your saviors to now you're afraid of the cops,
Mhm.
and the city, especially a city like New York, responding to that. And I didn't see it as much in the second one, and I
Mhm.
thought that was a loss. But based on what you're saying, from the context of him keeping an eye on the city's reaction to him, it makes sense now why it's a problem for him that the people aren't afraid of the cops in the second movie, because that's what he was trying to accomplish. I
Mhm.
think that's a really interesting way to look at it.
Okay, cool. Well, let's going hand in hand with the script. Let's talk about the director and the direction. So William Lustig, as I mentioned, was the director, and he's got a very storied career. Beginning in the 70s, he started out as directing porno movies, and then he moved his way into exploitation movies. And probably the movie he's best known for was 1980s Maniac, which was considered a video nasty in the UK. It was very violent. The movie poster is iconic. It's a woman's decapitated head and a guy standing over her, standing in a pool of her blood. And his
Mm,
movies
yeah.
include a movie called Vigilante with Robert Forster and Fred Williamson. Obviously, Maniac Cop, Hit List, which is a fun little B action movie with Jan Michael Vincent and Lance Henriksen. Also, Relentless, as I mentioned earlier, and then obviously a couple of Maniac Cop 2 sequels. And he also appeared in some of Sam Raimi's movies, including with a cameo in Darkman, Army of Darkness. So that's pretty cool. And what
Mhm.
I loved about the direction of this film is because he started out as a horror movie director and exploitation director, and you see that in the way he portrays violence. It's gloriously
Visceral.
bloody. It's like in your face. It's unapologetic. But I
Mm.
thought this film, just being one of the few movies that I could really cite as an example of a sort of a horror and action movie mashup, and I think they do
Combined.
both elements justice. No pun intended.
Hmm.
I wish
I
it was
Okay.
intended, because that was good.
But yeah, but Carlos,
So
what you think of just sort of just the combining those two genres, because those are not two genres that often go together.
yeah, so I think one of the things that I love most about this movie is the style, right? Like it's got this scrumptious, neon, smoky. Again, back to where we're talking about New York as a city, right? And
Smoke
again, you're
everywhere.
right. Like we were watching Commando, and in Commando on the island, when Arnold Schwarzenegger shot a bunch of guards or whatever, they would just right, no squibs, like no nothing, right? Where in this one, every single kill is stylized and super bloody. The style just has this real evocative like noir slash sketch. Like I think it's such a awesomely well put together package of uh, and not just the cutting, but also I think the cinematography is very evocative again of that like 80s style. I absolutely love the look and feel of this movie.
Yeah, and Carlos, to your
Also, I
point,
saw.
because I just listened to director's commentary again yesterday, he was going for sort of evoking the feel of those universal horror movies, and there's like some direct homages to that period of horror. Like the end, for example, is a homage to the ending of The Thing from Another World, with the monster on
Mm.
fire. And then also
Oh,
and also
okay.
the noir element with Robert Davi and with the cap, with the hat on, and just like the shadows and everything like that.
Smoking
Yeah.
everywhere. Yeah, I think also too, some of the some of the way the dialogue was directed between them is really interesting. Some of the scenes between Davi and the psychiatrist lady, have some of those tropes, like you were saying about the like, oh, I don't like you getting a head shrinker. I think it's kind of funny though. I thought it was an odd choice to have her kind of blame Robert Davi for the suicide of his partner. That doesn't seem like what a cop psychiatrist would do, right? So apparently Davi's like partner committed suicide, and she kind of intimates, well, maybe like I was supposed to see him the day he died, but somebody told him not to do it, right? And again, it harkens back to I think there's a lot of I think Davi's character particularly really reminds me of kind of like the gumshoe from like the 40s
Mhm.
and 50s kind of beautiful woman walked in my door, maybe today's my lucky day, the city, like right, like the voiceovers that you might have heard
Yeah.
from those movies. I really did love the direction of this movie.
He's toxic
Right.
masculinity,
Yeah.
or so,
There's a bit of
Personified.
that in the film in terms of the theme. But Dash, what did you think just about just the overall style and vision of the film? Because it's so unique in the sense that there are not many
it
types of movies like this.
it definitely is, and with this one, with the bigger and bolder, it definitely had that like heavier on the action. I think this one was a little bit less on the slasher and horror point. And one of the things with this, I do like how it felt. I like how it looked. I liked a lot of the choices made. But it seems like some of it might have lost some of the discipline from the first one, where too many ideas were introduced. So there seem to be no like real maniac cop rules that I would root solely in horror. So, for example, like and with the first one, they kind of with the opening credits, right? He's buttoning up his suit. You see him with the Billy Club, and then a running theme going forward. He has his Jason machete, right? Like it's
I
his
love
Billy Club
that.
that turns into the knife.
And he's
In
like
this
flipping it
one,
too. I love that too.
and
That's
he
dope.
does a lot of like typical horror stuff. He's there, you look away,
He's
he
done.
you look back, he's gone. In this one, some stuff was just funny, and I don't know if it was like intentionally meant to be funny, because for example, like one of the earlier killings in the movie, he disappears, right? He stabs Bruce Campbell through the neck. You got your like classic like Jason thing. Then he runs into someone who's getting a ticket, and
I love
my
that
man
scene.
puts him on the back of
He
the
drives
tow
off.
truck and drives off. Okay, like he has a little bit of a history with being able to do some practical stuff. One of the things that made me laugh in the first one is where he's driving the paddy wagon and you see him like honking the horn, and he's like he has a little bit of road rage like the rest of us. So like
Mhm.
you break a little bit of that mystique. Then in this one, he has a custom car. Like he doesn't have like a regular squad car. It's like painted black. It's its own thing. Then he has a machine gun at another point. Then he's walking across the bridge. Then he's just hanging out, being offered a drink. Then he has minions, like, like kind of going on. So I thought some of it, especially, I think this is the moment where the short run time kind of hurt the direction for me, because typically I like the art direction. I like how stuff is presented. I like how a lot of the world is presented, but it kind of didn't give me a box to play in to see where those boundaries are going, because I'm like, you can disappear, why are you driving, like,
Mhm.
and not on a logistical point of view, but there's just certain stuff where you're just like, you can play up this other element the way like a Jason does constantly. And when you have rules, seeing them bend them is kind of the fun part, right? Like, you're okay, Freddy can go into your dreams. And then when you see part four, he's doing a level of dream manipulation that you didn't see for the first three films. And you're like, wow, this is a real like interesting choice to do it. With this one, he does that. But one thing that I will say is, with which way I thought was really good directing, is it starts to play with some of the cliches of action movies. Since I haven't seen this, and basically like I'm gonna call it for seeing it for the first time, I did catch myself wondering, like, I know it's like a major 80s and 90s staple of police movies to have the camera dolly down the shooting range.
Mhm.
And when you have those moments, and I was like, yeah, when was the last time I saw that? Like, that's Love It in
Mhm.
RoboCop, and you have all those moments, and nothing ever happens of note, right? And in this one, they go through the shot, you're like,
Look,
nothing's gonna happen. Then all of a sudden, the cops just start
shooting
getting
back.
blown away, and then he comes out through the shadows
Yeah.
into this like
It's the shooting
major
range that shoots
sequence.
back, which I think is just
Back. Yeah, dude,
Yeah,
that's
such a
so
that was
clever and
mwah,
simple idea.
chef's kiss.
yeah, so it's kind of going against everything I just said, right? Like, I'm
Yeah.
like, oh, these things, but that's where I will give it another like back to good directing, because it kept subverting my expectations. And while I don't think it leaned into like, this is horror, like this is a slasher movie, it did then do that to the action genre, and I thought that was a really great choice. So directing was really on point for this.
Yeah, and with the directing, obviously, the action is ramped up by a lot in the second one, and I think credit goes to not only the director but the stunt coordinator, Spiro Rosatos, who's gone on to
Yes.
do huge movies like Fast and Furious, and Venom, and all this, major Hollywood films. But he was also the stunt coordinator in the first one, and I thought that was something that was really outstanding in the first one for a low budget movie, especially the scene at the end when the cars, that
Yo.
truck is going off the pier, and
Yeah,
that's
and
Spiro Rosatos as doubling for Bruce Campbell, and he's
Oh,
flipping off the
I
off of that truck, and it almost lands on his
I
head.
remember I had to rewind it because I was
he
like,
thought he's
"Is
gonna
that
fall
a
under.
dude
Yeah,
on
that's a
there?" And I was like, "No,
yeah,
that's
it's
too
crazy.
crazy." And then when he pops up in the water, I was like,
Starts swimming
"No
away.
way!"
Yeah.
That was
And
insane.
also,
Yeah,
he's also doubling for the guy that crashes out the window, lands on the car, and then falls off and gets shot by Robert
get
Davi.
shot.
So, but to me, there's just a lot of standout action sequences in this film, and one of them was
Hundred
when
percent.
Claudia Christian gets handcuffed to the car and gets
The
rolled down
car.
the hill.
That's
And
great.
the thing is, and this is what I love about directors' commentaries and just kind of learning about these movies after the fact, because when these movies first came out as B movies, you couldn't read too much about them. It's not like, the Daily News was going to be interviewing William
No
Lustig about the
internet.
film. But knowing what I know now, it's great because especially films that you liked as a kid, there was just something about them and maybe you couldn't quite verbalize. And for this movie, it just had like a style that I liked. It was just gritty. It was like a little crazy and insane. And in that period of time, I was really into John Woo movies, Hong Kong action movies, and things like that. And there just felt like there was something adjacent there with Maniac Cop 2. And it turns out William Lustig used to go to Chinatown all the time, being a New Yorker, go to the Music Palace, watch Hong Kong action movies. And that scene with the handcuff to the car, that was inspired by a Jackie Chan movie in Police Story 1. And he said the reason how that got inspired is in that film there's a chase down like a shanty town on a hill, and there's a point in the film where Jackie Chan he arrests someone and handcuffs them to a steering wheel, and William Lustig thought that the car would be pushed down the hill, which never happened. And he said, let me put that in my movie.
You do
So
that.
that's what he did with Maniac Cop 2. So
That's
again, I
cool.
think there's the action in this movie just feels very different than a lot of the mainstream action movies from that period, because they weren't going for the wild kind of silly and almost absurd spectacle that like a Jackie Chan movie was doing back in the day. And in this film, woman handcuffed outside of a car going wildly through traffic, I thought was a standout moment. And then also just some of the stunts in the films. But I'm curious to hear what,
She manages
like
to get back
Carlos,
in
like
the
what
car, which
was
is
your
good.
favorite action sequence or stunt in the film?
So, so I think a major highlight for me in this movie was the police station shootout. I think Chef's Kiss. I actually, and this might be a hot take, I prefer this police station shootout to Terminator One police station shootout. Right, like it does things. If you think about the Terminator One, it's just kind of him walking around shooting people, right? Where this one, there's a bunch of creativity. The idea, first of all, again, we don't know how we got into the police station, got into that back part, but right, the
He
idea of
walked through that. There's that one scene where he just walks through the wall and like the
yeah,
reef.
yeah.
Well, I
So
think that's a
again,
horror movie aspect, right? Where they don't explain how
she
the
just
killer
shows up.
shows up. He's just kind of there, he just teleports to where he
No,
needs
but
to be.
and maybe maybe I'm overthinking this too much, but I kind of almost felt like the cops are at the shooting range shooting perps. This is the experience of the perps shooting back at them, right?
That
Like
was awesome.
again,
Yeah,
this is like the real right. So I thought that was cool, and also he's going through them killing cops in very different ways, going up the stairs. I've never seen a police station set up like with the glass and the wood, but he's just walking through cubicles basically, throwing people aside. I just thought that it was so expertly done that it was my favorite part of the entire movie, and I didn't think that I would see another police shootout scene that the red. Inevitably, you're going to compare it to Terminator One, right? That's like one of the only movies that has that kind of sequence in it, and I think this one's actually better than that one. Just at a terms of like we got to see more creativity. Like again, he took one guy and tossed him through like four cubicles, right? And it just happens to be all made of glass. And I mean, I think it's a little silly that they really didn't try to put up much of a fight. As a matter of fact, outside when Davi comes in and he's asking for like a sit rep, the guy was like, "Yeah, he just killed like half a dozen. We're just giving him a wide berth now."
yeah,
Like,
yeah.
what else are you gonna do? And then there's almost what I think would have been a very iconic shot at the end is the girl, the psychiatrist cop is standing next to the killer. Somehow Leo Rossi's character just knew that Maniac Cop was going to come get him, and they're like, "Oh shit, something's going on," and they're over there by the cells, and then all of a sudden, here comes Maniac Cop just busting through the wall. I just think from start to finish, I thought it was immaculately done, and I really enjoyed it. Also, I don't know if we mentioned this. I think it's a different actor, right? Didn't the original actor from Maniac Cop One die?
You mean the guy that played
No, I
Maniac
think that
Cop?
was.
The guy who played the original
It's the
Maniac
same
Cop.
guy, Robert
Is
Zadar.
it
Yeah,
okay? I got to look up
just different makeup.
because he looks a little bit different. I don't know if
He's swole
he's
Yeah.
swole.
from
He's like a lot more
surviving being.
swole,
Well, he survived being drowned in the first one, so
and
he's
that's why his
supposed
face
to.
looks all kind of like
Well,
rubbery. Is that what it
I
was?
think that's the rationale, but again, I think that's where that's for me. It's the brilliance of this film, just ramping things up because the makeup was kind of shitty in the first one. He just looked like someone with bad acne, and here he's like a full on monster. But Dash,
Well, that first scene when they reveal him in the convenience
yeah,
store as the silhouette, he was so yoked. He showed up
Yeah, he looked
like in the
different.
background, and I was like, "Oh shit, we got Maniac Cop 2, yo!
well,
This
it's
is
probably
insane."
donuts and being in the Hudson River, but Dash, action favorite action sequence.
I'm gonna go with that whole cop art. I know I just said it was like a little bit ridiculous for him to have his own custom car, but I thought the whole like lead up into it because there's a whole beginning part of I just like action that's motivated by something like two things usually, like what are they trying to get, and I like that the action in this one had like a separate second context to it. So it was like not only get away, but how do you get away? Like it's not just like, okay, let's lose this person, let's make a left. There was like a whole big portion of every time that the something happened, it would either elevate. So they get into the car, they're just in a taxi cab, Maniac Cop shows up. The first obstacle is the driver doesn't want to drive them fast. What are you getting me into? Then he gets a flat tire. Then she has to get into the car, and what's her name is Claudia's in the back. Then she gets out, and the person you thought who was not gonna die dies.
Die.
Then she's handcuffed to the car on a whole different expedition that has nothing to do with getting away at this point. And I just
Winds up in
love
the
that,
Hollywood
just
Hills somehow.
yeah, but just the disadvantage that she was at to get out. And when she gets into the car, like, it's a very subtle like sound design thing of her like breaking her wrist or her arm to be able to get in. I thought was cool.
Oh, I
And there
didn't
was a
catch
lot
that.
of, yeah, there's like a little bit of a sound of like and that's why she's in the sling for the whole rest of
Hmm.
the movie. And because of, I think, the high stakes in it, I believe that this character could have died at any point,
Yeah.
because I just saw two people that I thought were going to be in the entire movie
Yeah.
die. And at this point, mind you, at this point in the movie, she's still not sold really on the idea of the Maniac Cop. Is it, so she's not like an ally yet. She's still kind of the person who's like a Dr. Silberman in
Right.
Terminator 2, the lawyer in Jurassic Park. Like, you always have those like kind of like I wouldn't call them like the main villains, but you're like halfway villain. And sometimes they'll have like a change of heart but still get eaten by a
Mhm.
T-Rex mid movie. And at that point, I think that there was like just a level of, how is this character going to get out of it? Are they going to get out of it? And then just the practical nature of it, like, it, obviously no CG, this wasn't miniatures. And just, there were parts where I was just like, oh, they're about to hit this. Whoa,
Yeah.
did she just turned at the nick of time? And I thought everything in terms of the coverage of it, rooting us where we are in the space of, like, on the road, the oncoming cars, what's going on inside. It did a lot of like little tension parts of where she was able to turn the car but couldn't get in, and that could be really messy, of trying to depict of how close this person is to getting out of this situation. And I thought it was just really a really well
Yeah,
done
and well,
action scene.
I think credit to the stunt coordinator, and you can see how he went. I mean, this was a $4 million movie. That's also just something to remember when you watch these like B movies. That this is a super low budget movie, and he's able to deliver a sequence like that in this type of film. And you can see how he went on to Fast and Furious, because I've only watched like one or two of the Fast and Furious movies, and as I was watching it, I was like, this reminds me a lot of like some of the car scenes in the Maniac Cop series. When I looked it up, it turned out to be the same guy. But for me, the scene that I really love, action sequence wise, or just kind of stunt wise, is the ending where Maniac Cop is on fire. He's walking through the jail, and then Leo Rossi, he grabs Leo Rossi, and they go out the wall, and they're so it's two
Mhm.
stuntmen set on fire, falling 5 or 6 stories down onto
Onto a
a bus,
bus.
That
and then the
explodes
bus
for no
explodes.
reason.
So again, I just relish the William Lustig's direction, just like to go over the top. It doesn't need to be realistic. Like for example, that
Hmm.
sequence when Lori or whoever's riding on the rims of that taxi, those are not sparks
Hmm.
coming
The
out of the rims.
sparking.
That's something that's rigged up, for dramatic effect. And the same thing
It
with the
looked good
burn
though.
at the end. Obviously, it's just like he just touches people and they lay on fire. You know what I mean?
It light up.
But and so it's not realistic, and he just pushes someone out the wall, and the wall just breaks apart. Like the Kool Aid Man coming out of something. So yeah, so I think that's the great thing about this movie. It doesn't try to be realistic. It feels like a living comic book in terms of just sort of how over the top it is, a live action comic book.
Mhm.
Um, and then let's talk about and then lastly, let's just talk about a little bit about the music, because for me, when I saw the first Maniac Cop and they have that score playing in the very beginning when he's kind of getting dressed up, it was so eerie and evocative. And when they used it again in the film during the flashback, you do get a sense that Maniac Cop maybe is being portrayed as an anti-hero, because it is kind of sympathetic. But I thought for the film that it was, the music, it's not very often that I remember music from a movie, especially an action movie. But I
Mhm.
really love the music in this film. Not so much the rap song at the end, and I don't know if you guys
That's what I
the
was gonna
Maniac
go.
Cop rap,
Yeah.
which I thought was pretty
I
awful
love
and
that.
probably a joke. But Carlos, what did you think about the music overall and the score?
So two things when I think about music stand out for me, and one is the rap. And again, the rap I think for me at the end was just because I can't. The only other time I could think of a movie at the end having a rap was Ninja Turtles, right? Go Ninja, go! And then
No,
I
no,
love
the first one, TURTLE
T-L-E. It's a
power.
half shell with the turtle. Oh shit, yeah. Right, fair enough, fair enough. But and I love the fact I knew I was in for some great old school rap when I heard the word jive. He's a
Mm.
super cop. He's only half alive. I know it sounds like jive. I was like, that's great. An- Another thing that stood out to me was, and I thought it was kind of out of place. I feel like they were trying to do kind of a Friday a Nightmare on Elm Street thing with the kids doing like the nursery rhyme. And again, it was one of those things that I mean, in Jason in Nightmare on Elm Street, it makes sense. It's the kids, who are afraid to fall asleep, right? And his targets are kids. I wasn't really sure what they were getting at, other than it's just spooky to
There's a
have
cop
kids.
involved too. Like one's deaf, and yeah, I did. I was the
Yeah,
same.
and actually,
I
let
didn't
me.
really understand that.
Yeah, and I just want to say I forgot to mention before the music was done by Jade Chataway, and he has done a ton of Star Trek stuff. I'm not the biggest Star Trek fan, but he's done Next Generation, Deep Space Nine, Voyager, and Enterprise. And during the '80s,
So that's really
he
orchestral
did a lot
stuff.
of '80s action movies like Invasion USA, Missing in Action, Red Scorpion. So he's got he's I guess he's one of those quintessential '80s action sort of composers.
Soundtrack.
But Dash, your
Yeah, the
thoughts on
soundtrack
the
definitely
music or
lended.
the Maniac Cop rap? Your choice.
And the music definitely lended more into the action part. I thought like there were parts where it stood out, where something was going on, and I was like, "Oh, this is a good track." Some of the horror I thought was a little hokey. There was like one part where it was like very like, "Woo." I was like, "All right, it's a little bit heavy handed," but as a bigger like as the aliens versus alien. I think that those like action set pieces really benefited from the score on it.
All right. All right. And reaction for this movie is pretty mixed depending.
Real quick, sorry, real before we go into the reaction, can we talk about that? I'm done now adding this to my Christmas movie rotation. Did not know
Oh,
going in. I'm counting
well,
this
the
as a
first one is
Christmas
a St.
movie. We got
Patrick's Day
Bruce.
movie, and this one, I guess, is a Christmas
Which
movie.
is
Yeah.
which is odd because it's supposed to take place days after.
Yeah, I mean that's the continuity is not there, but you kind of go with it. I think that's how you got to look at this movie. You just got to go with it. And I think that's one of the reasons why there is a pretty divergent reaction to the films because if you can go with it, you love it for what it is. If you're gonna be hung up on some of the logic and plot holes, then it's probably going to
It's
be
gonna be
the
tough.
movie's probably going to seem pretty stupid. But Carlos, you pulled out some quotes that you found online about a reaction. So you want to share some of them?
Yeah, I mean, sure. So again, back to your point. So it's got a 60 on Rotten Tomatoes, and when you go through the a bunch of the reviews, what you'll find is it's not a 60 because a bunch of people rated it a 6. It's a 60 because you have a bunch of people that rated it 8s and a bunch of people that rated it 3s, right? So it's very divisive in that way. Some of the ones that I said. Some of the interesting things that I saw was Ty Burr gave it a C. He called it a brutal, stupid zombie film in which style almost redeems the sleaze, which I couldn't disagree with more. Um, Another one he says that I found was interesting is Maniac Cop 2 embodies all the excesses that made 80s horror sequels so great, right? They just kind of go all over the place, and I think you're exactly right. It's like you either loved it or you hate it, and there's no like this movie's pretty good, right? It's all like
Yeah,
this is the best
it's
thing I've
very
ever seen.
polarizing. Yeah, you got to appreciate it for what it is, and I know B movies are an acquired taste, but that's really what I love about B movies is the fact that it's sometimes they could be unpredictable, and sometimes there's hidden gems. And for me, this is like one of the greatest hidden gems of that B movie direct to video era because this is not phoned in. this was filmed the intention of getting a theatrical release. So I guess that's why the scale and scope seem bigger than its $4 million budget.
Yeah, it looks like it was New Line that they were in talks with
Yeah,
to try
what
to get it
happened
released, but
was
it
they
fell
got a
apart.
deal from they got two offers, one from New Line to release it theatrically, but there's no guarantee, but for a small amount of money, and if it becomes a hit, you'll get a piece of that. And they also got an offer from Live Entertainment for a home video release, and they got money up front. And I guess the investors decided to just take the sure bet, which was the direct to video. But the film did open theatrically around the world before it made it to the U.S. On VHS tape back in the day. All right, so let's start to wrap this up. So, Dash, your favorite scene from the movie?
My favorites. Oh man, my favorite scene. Probably. I know I said my favorite action sequence was the car, but I'm with Carlos. I think it was the police station, just because of how crazy it was. It leans into the Maniac Cop part, and runner up is a moment. It wasn't a full scene, but it was. And this kind of goes into just another one of those subverting expectations when. Um, what's her name from the first movie winds up getting thrown into a
The
hardware
chainsaw,
store, and she looks up and there's a
it's a
cardboard
That's
chainsaw,
fully
cutout holding a
operational
chain.
and with gas in
gassed
it.
up and
By
ready to
the way,
go.
yeah.
And in terms of just like expectations, like I went in and it just really did not know what to expect
Oh, that's the best
during
way
this,
to go
and
into
that was
these
early
movies.
enough
Yeah.
in the. Yeah, and that was it was I think maybe that moment was early enough into the movie where I don't know the police station definitely was a highlight. It's a toss up between that and just that whole car sequence, because now that I'm thinking about it, I was like I have to mention that moment, and then just the idea that that moment is a part of like 4 or 5 other moments that were really crazy. Those are definitely really big scene highlights for me, those two.
Carlos?
I also love how he ate the chainsaw in his hand like it was nothing. Like she just
Yeah.
chainsaw, he just ate that shit and then snapped her neck. And you're like, all right, well, I guess we lost our second lead.
Yeah. Nothing else you can do.
So, Carlos, favorite scene that you haven't mentioned yet?
For me, favorite scene again goes to the police station shootout, but honorable mention goes to the scene where they wind up in Leo Rossi's apartment. Again, I hadn't seen this movie in a long time, so it was kind of like watching again for the first time. And to Anthony's point, you don't know where this is going, right? And now that you're going to see the other killer, and I wasn't sure if he was going to kill this guy or not. And all of a sudden, just the apartment looked real crazy with the red lights and the brick exposed wall. It was like nice, but in a real shitty way. Like I don't know, it was like I don't know really how to explain it, but in terms of like
Yeah, it's a
style
beautiful shot.
and also not knowing what's gonna happen, it's beautifully shot. Again, the music right is perfect for it, and kind of tense of like, is he gonna kill him? Isn't he gonna kill him? If he does kill him, will I be mad about it? Will I not be mad about it? So I really enjoyed that scene as well.
Okay, for me, I mean, my favorite scene is the finale and the car chase and the police sequence. But I do honorable mention goes to the opening scene when the bodega is being robbed, because one of my pet peeves in movies is everyone has perfect teeth, even the homeless people and the crack addicts and everything.
Yo, his
And
teeth were fucked
and
up.
the beautiful thing in that scene is, number one, the guy just looked like disgusting. And then there's also a lot of dark humor in the opening, and it's also ultra stylized, like when they shoot the refrigerator and the smoke and the neon red, and like that's not realistic, that doesn't
Hmm.
happen, right? But also I
Yeah,
like the
yeah.
fact that they make the bodega owner a kind of an asshole, because after the police shows up, he calls the robber an asshole, and
I won the
yeah,
money.
right, it's like my money and screw that guy. And he gets blown away. So again, that's your point, subverting expectations, and also the fact that everything just, there's so much glass breaking, and when they shoot the guy, when the police shoot the guy later, he flies up like 6 feet in the air, off the ground and into the
Yeah.
glass, and it shatters. So
I also love the idea of death by cop, right? He was like another one of these things where it's like, I'm going to kill you, but I'm not going to kill you directly. I'm just going to put you in a position where I know the situation is going to get to the point where you're going to die, right? And the cops are going to do it. And to your point about him flying up in the air. If you look at the cold intro, which I absolutely loved again too, which is the last scene in the first movie. There's a shot where Maniac Cop grabs the shotgun and he's about to shoot Bruce Campbell or whatever, and the other guy comes. The other cop shows up out of nowhere. Like, where was he the whole time? Completely misses. Maniac Cop shoots him, and that guy also shot up 6 feet in the air into a bunch of boxes, which is
It's
always a lot of
science.
fun.
It's physics.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. Also, I think it's kind of weird too. If you notice, what was Bruce Campbell trying to do by jumping on the side of that truck? And also, he wasn't controlling the wheel. Maniac Cop just drove himself into that spike,
I don't know.
which I didn't
I don't
get.
know, but I thought that that just looked cool at the end of Maniac Cop 1.
It did look
Yeah.
cool.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
So
It did look cool.
so let's do a rating. We're gonna rate it five best five out of five 8x10 glossies, which was what Leo Rossi was collecting from all the strippers that he was killing. So Dash, you
Okay.
kick it off. How many 8x10 glossies out of
Uh,
five?
I love that he went to Club 69 where he was there. I'm gonna give him four burning stuntmen out of five. I really had fun with the movie. I could see myself watching this repeatedly. Didn't I'm gonna give the lack of like restraint that took the star from me. I feel like it's doing a little too much at times, and there are times where I felt like that was really the move to just make it bigger and crazier, but at sometimes I think it's a little bit like undisciplined to that point where like you know I'm really big into like a movie that like makes a promise and then keeps that promise. And then as I'm watching it, like that promise kept expanding. So I'm like, oh, this is a slasher movie, but he drives, but he also does this. And he, like now he's with goons. And there was a couple of points where it didn't lose me, but I was just like, especially given the really short runtime, like I could have had certain moments spent doing something else, not with like the people in the jail or the like kind of buddy cop portion of it. So that's really taking it away from me, but I had a really fun time watching this, and just like that whole like, oh well, this is gonna happen, and then 2 seconds later like, oh no, it's not. So I'm going for it at five.
All right, Carlos.
So for me, I'm very conflicted with this movie. I It's frustrating how I didn't love this movie, and the reason for it is because it has so many constituent parts that I love. It's got all the pieces in place together to be a movie that I really love. I love Robert Davi. I love the action sequences. I love the city. There's so much about it that I love, that the dissonance in the story, the plot holes take it away from me, and it goes from being like I could really love this to just kind of meh. So I think that this had the ability for me to be a four, but as it stands, because I'm having a hard time grappling with the disconnect, I'm gonna go with three Billy Club swords out of five. And also, I just want to give an honorable mention to. I really think it's cool. They only did it for one scene. I think they should have brought it more. Was the thing that he was doing, flipping the Billy Club
Mm.
before he kills Bruce Campbell,
Yeah, yeah,
right?
yeah.
Like the thwap, let you know, like if he hits you with this thing, it's gonna fuck you up.
Yeah.
But then also he's got a sword inside it too. So I thought that was a really cool thing, and I wish they would have brought it up more. But yeah,
Yeah,
that's
he
me.
actually
It's
showed it
three.
to Leo Rossi at that one point where he had the knife and he was like,
Yeah,
oh,
yeah,
you got your own. And he's like, yeah, but I'm not going to use it again.
yeah.
Yeah, so for me, this gets a solid 4 out of 5 8x10 glossies. I just this movie embodies all the things I love about exploitation movies. And I could appreciate something that's thoughtful and cerebral, but I could also think I could if the goal is just to give me a good time and make blood fly on the walls, this is it. And also, I was thinking this really is like my three favorite movies are Taxi Driver, Henry Portrait, a Serial Killer, and King of New York. And I think this is sort of a mashup of all those three, where you have the film noir
Mm.
elements, you have that New York grit, and then you have the horror element. And again, watching this over again, I found new things to love about the movies just from a filmmaking standpoint. And I highly recommend the Blu-ray or the 4K I have the Blu-ray. I know Dash, you got the 4K. I got to upgrade soon, but I also have the Thai version of it before the version
Oh
came out.
wow,
Oh,
that's cool.
When I was in Thailand, I picked it up. But yeah,
King of New
no,
York.
the I really highly recommend the disc version because it has a audio commentary with the director, and it's moderated by
Mm,
Nicholas Winding Refn, the director of Drive. Because the two of them were going to remake Maniac Cop at one point and create a TV series, which I don't know how the hell you do that.
mm.
That was announced, I think, in like 2017 or something. Nothing's come to fruition since, but it's a really fascinating commentary, and you learn a lot just about the low budget filmmaking process.
It's
I
interesting that
love.
you said that you really enjoyed that King of New York is one of your favorite movies because actually I think that came out the same year as this,
Yes.
and so I mean I guess some of the stuff that you see kind of across both, I could see like I'm just looking at some of the movies that came out this year that all have a kind of similar vibe. Like Darkman came out that year, King of New York came out that year, Nightbreed, Class of 1999, right? Death Warrant. For me, the first Power was a really good one that came out that year. I actually think I like the first Power more than this, but I'm looking at its contemporaries. It was 90 was an amazing year for these kinds of like kind of low budget actiony flicks, and this definitely steps in as one of the premier contenders for that year's like slew of movies.
Well, it does sound like one of the kind of themes is like the structure of stuff, right? King of New York is very, the crime movie, and I think I don't know if it's like I'd love to read more about it, but especially towards the late '80s, you had a lot about like not just street, like just random thugs walking around. There was like some sort of context, and given the two Maniac Cops, at least one and two of they meant like the first one they mentioned brutality a
Hmm.
lot.
This
This
is right
one,
before Rodney King.
yeah, this one, really heavy into the police shooting them. Like a whole subplot is them when you think it's going to be Bruce Campbell is them being cleared for action, and yeah, I'm curious of like that turning point because a lot of movies take time to be
Come out.
developed. So like, I guess like I wonder what was going on in the mentality of, I guess, 86, 87 to make like an 89 or, like 1990 release
Mm,
date. But one thing that I would say about getting this on disc is I love that it says you have the right to remain
remain
silent
silent
dot dot dot
Forever.
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 Like,
That's
Yeah.
great. That
I
is
love
great.
like a really good
Well, that was
poster line.
apparently how they pitched the movie, how Larry Cohen pitched the movie, because he came up with that tagline and said, "Let's make a movie about a crazy, like, killer cop." And just to wrap things up, we didn't talk much about Maniac Cop 3 because that was a very troubled production. William Lustig came back to direct, but he left the project and it got finished by the producers. So it's very disjointed. They reused some footage from like recycled footage, not just kind of reused, but repurposed footage from the first two movies because they had to fill out the runtime. There are some outstanding stunts in the movie, but the film itself is kind of ho hum, and that's something that William Lustig admits because he left the production. So that's why we didn't talk much about that. I don't consider that one of my favorite films, unlike Maniac Cop 2. But that's a movie for you. And let's talk about next our next episode, and it's going to be Dash picking the film. So what's it going to be?
Yeah. It's going to be a movie that is celebrating, I believe, its 30-year anniversary, released in 1994, and that is going to be Time Cop, starring
Woo!
John Claude Van Damme and directed by Peter Hyams. And I think that I like. We were kind of talking about like a lot of my. I'm a big, the like commercial action hero person. So what's better than one John Claude Van Damme? A
Two.
future John Claude Van Damme who can't
And his
touch
big
past
knots on his
John Claude
head.
Big
Van
knot in his
Damme.
head and a
Yeah.
mullet.
So yeah, yeah, exactly. So who do you like, mullet or not buzz cut, but short hair? But yeah, we're gonna be talking about Time Cop, movie that I haven't seen for a while, but really
I
loved
saw
it.
that a couple years
One of my
ago.
favorite things to do
Mm,
with some of these movies is movies that take place in a future, in a supposed future, but when you go back now, like that year would be our past,
yeah, yeah.
right? So according to that time frame, like we should be time copping shit right now, right? So it'll be interesting to go. I haven't seen that movie in years, so I'm really looking forward to it.
All
Awesome.
right, cool. Well, thank you everyone for tuning in to this episode of Shoot Punch Kick, and we will see you next time.
Don't forget to like, comment, subscribe. Comments in the body. We'd love to get into some conversations with you guys. Thanks so much for listening.